The global economy is at a turning point, with tensions escalating between the United States and China. From trade restrictions to bond sell-offs and supply chain disruptions, both nations are flexing their economic muscle in a battle that could reshape industries worldwide. Recent Chinese countermeasures, particularly in the auto sector, are just one piece of a much larger power struggle. This conflict goes beyond mere tariffs. It's a fight for dominance in key industries like technology, energy, and manufacturing. As supply chains shift and alliances are tested, the ripple effects will be felt across global markets. The outcome of the standoff could redefine economic leadership for decades to come. But is this merely the beginning of a full-scale economic war? And how will these shifts impact Africa and the rest of the world? Stay with us as we unravel this complex web of trade, finance, and influence. But before we dive in, subscribe to the African Web for more in-depth analysis on global affairs shaping Africa's future. For decades, the US has relied heavily on China for cheap imports, including essential components for its automotive and technology industries. However, that economic order is crumbling as China aggressively cuts its exports of critical materials and reduces its holdings of US Treasury bonds. Treasury bonds are a key source of funding for the US government. If China, the second largest foreign holder of these bonds, continues its sell-off, Washington will have to borrow more, raise interest rates, and brace for severe inflation. But that's not all. China's grip on crucial exports, especially in rare earth minerals essential for electric vehicles and semiconductor production, is tightening. The automotive sector is among the hardest hit by China's counterstrike. Key materials used in electric vehicle (EV) batteries, such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel, are largely sourced from China. If Beijing restricts exports, the US could face an EV supply crisis. Consider this: over 75% of the world's battery supply chain is controlled by China. If these exports slow down or become more expensive, major automakers like Tesla, General Motors, and Ford will be forced to pass the costs onto consumers. Would you be willing to pay double for an electric vehicle? And if that happens, will the push for electric cars in the US stall completely, reversing years of progress toward green energy? Even traditional gasoline-powered cars are not safe. Many of their components, from semiconductors to aluminum and steel, rely on China's manufacturing power. With supply chain disruptions looming, the cost of vehicles is set to skyrocket, potentially leading to an auto industry recession. The trade war between the US and China is not just limited to automobiles. The entire supply chain of the US economy is intertwined with Chinese production. One of the most affected industries is technology and electronics, as over 70% of consumer electronics sold in the US are manufactured in China. Any disruption in supply could lead to a sharp increase in prices for smartphones, laptops, and household gadgets, directly affecting consumers. How would an average American household cope if everyday tech devices became significantly more expensive or even harder to find? Another critical sector is renewable energy, given that China controls 90% of the global rare earth production, which is essential for manufacturing solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicle batteries. This dominance puts America's clean energy ambitions at risk, potentially stalling progress in green technology. Additionally, agriculture is feeling the strain, as China is a major buyer of US agricultural exports. If Beijing decides to shift its purchases to other markets, American farmers could face devastating financial losses, further escalating economic tensions between the two nations. The dominance of the US dollar is also being challenged. China, along with BRICS nations like Russia, Brazil, and India, is actively reducing reliance on the dollar in global trade. Did you know that the US dollar accounted for 71% of global reserves in 1999? Today, that figure has dropped to just 58%, and it continues to decline. If more countries switch to the Chinese yuan or other currencies for trade, the US will lose its biggest economic advantage: its ability to control global financial policies. To reduce dependency on China, the US has implemented several strategies. One major initiative is the CHIPS Act, a $52 billion investment aimed at boosting domestic semiconductor production. However, experts warn that it could take more than a decade to build a fully self-sufficient supply chain. Can the US afford to wait that long while competing in a rapidly evolving global market? Another approach involves relocating supply chains by encouraging companies to shift production to friendlier nations such as India and Mexico. While this move could help reduce reliance on China, higher manufacturing costs pose a significant challenge. Additionally, the US has imposed tariff hikes on Chinese goods, a move intended to counteract economic pressures. However, there is concern that this strategy could backfire, making everyday goods more expensive for American consumers and potentially worsening inflation. China is not merely reacting to US actions, it is proactively setting up countermeasures that could further destabilize the global economy. One major strategy is its increased investment in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. By securing long-term agreements for essential raw materials such as copper, cobalt, and lithium, China is ensuring that it has a continuous supply of critical resources while limiting US access to these markets. China has also been increasing its influence in global financial institutions, pushing for a multipolar financial system that reduces dependence on Western-dominated institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. This shift is evident in the rise of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which provides an alternative financing platform for developing nations, reducing their reliance on US-led financial institutions. Amidst this economic tug-of-war, Africa stands at a crossroads. China has been a dominant investor in Africa's infrastructure, mining, and manufacturing sectors. With the US and China at odds, African nations could leverage this situation to negotiate better trade deals and attract new investment opportunities. However, could Africa also face collateral damage? If China redirects its exports away from the US, could African nations see shortages of essential goods or increased prices? Will the continent's reliance on foreign trade partners make it vulnerable to global economic turmoil? For example, Africa's lithium and cobalt markets are crucial for both the US and China. If China tightens its grip on these resources, American companies might have to invest more heavily in African nations, leading to increased competition for mining rights. This could bring both economic benefits and risks, as African nations must carefully navigate these power struggles to secure long-term gains. Similarly, the global food market could be affected. If China shifts its agricultural imports from the US to African nations, African farmers could see an economic boom. However, this could also lead to food price volatility, affecting both local markets and global trade. The decisions made today will determine the future of the global economy. Will the US manage to counter China's economic offensive, or is it already too late? And what role will Africa play in this shifting world order? This economic battle is not just about trade, it is about the future of global leadership. The US and China are vying for control over resources, markets, and financial institutions, and their actions will shape international policies for years to come. What do you think? Can the US turn this crisis around? Or is a major economic shift inevitable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the African Web for more thought-provoking content. Stay tuned for more updates as this global economic battle unfolds.